Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to a Doors album ranking. The band itself formed in 1965 and unfortunately Jim Morrison left the band in 1971, so they weren't even around that long. And then unfortunately he died under mysterious circumstances, preventing any kind of reunion going on after that. The band itself did continue on and recorded two more albums after Morrison had left the band, and then formally disbanded in 1973, having released only 8 studio albums. Still, it's an amazing body of work. I'm going to review those 8 albums there, plus the 1978 An American Prayer album as well. So join me as I do an album ranking and run through of all 9 studio Doors albums. So we're going to get into that here in just a bit, but if you are new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also comment, like, subscribe. All those things do help my channel. Of course, I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you turn on notifications, you'll never miss an episode and stay up to date on really cool things like this with a Doors album ranking. And I gotta say, right off the bat here, the Doors are my favorite band out of the 60s. They're one of my all-time favorite groups, and I didn't grow up in that generation. I am more of an 80s child. I was born in 1976. So you'll have to understand that I'm coming into the group fully after they existed, but this is my album ranking. This is how I see it, and I hope you guys enjoy it nonetheless. So here we go. We're going to kick off with all 9 studio albums from the Doors, and we're going to start with coming in at number 9, Full Circle, their 1972 and 8th studio album and final album as a band. Of course, this is the second one without Jim Morrison on it. So I have this one, of course, on vinyl, and they have reissued it on CD, which I have the twofer that has both the, I guess it would be the 7th and 8th studio albums, so Other Voices and Full Circle, but I wanted to show the vinyl editions because as a kid, when I first found out there were 2 more Doors albums to go get beyond the ones that were with Jim Morrison, I was super excited about this stuff and digging it up and finding it. And I always thought this was a killer album. Now, unfortunately, though, this one here does not live up to the rest of the Doors catalog. We've got vocals handled by the other members of the band here. So Ray Manzarek on keyboards taking over vocals and Robbie Krieger on guitar also picking up on vocals here. And I think they do a fine take on the vocals, and it's good stuff. But this album here really had the band moving away from their sound, the sound in the sense of what was the Doors sound. Maybe if the band had continued on, we would have become more accustomed to the changes and things that were happening on this album. But I don't necessarily think it was the right thing to do, having lost Jim Morrison. The previous album, Other Voices, I think had more of that Doors style sound, and if they had stuck with that, they might have had more success. But the final single for the band to chart, and the one released off of here called The Mosquito, is a real kind of oddity. It's one of those songs that you release and people may get it. It's sort of a kitschy, funny sort of a thing, but not at all in the style of the Doors music. It's got a Latin or calypso style flavor to it. That always really turned me off. It's a song I don't like, number one. Maybe it worked perfect in 1972 when the album came out. I mean, it was a charting hit. I don't know if it was top 40, but I do know that it's the last charting hit for the band. Still, though, there's some great songs on this album. Particular standout ones that I enjoy is the opening track, Get Up and Dance, Hardwood Floor, and Good Rockin'. All good songs worth checking out, but unfortunately, this one coming in last place. All right, next one coming in at number 8, Other Voices. As I said, it's also on that CD edition, but here's the vinyl, and I think they did a good job with this. One, the title of it explains what's going on. You see the 3 members. We see that it's without Jim. They didn't try to hide it and suggest that Jim was in the band. So when this came out as their 7th studio album, it was the first one without Jim Morrison, and I'm sure that was a big shock to most people. They apparently did try out well, I don't know if they tried them out, but they went after trying to get other vocalists. And two of the big names that they went after, Paul McCartney and Iggy Pop. I mean, how crazy would that have been if either of those two guys had joined the group, and what would we have gotten today? Who knows at this point? But in the absence of that, that's when Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger took over on vocals. So they're the ones singing all the songs on here. And there's some real flashes of brilliance on this one here. In the Eye of the Sun, Ships with Souls, Tightrope Ride, all of those on here I think are really great. And despite this coming in at number 8 for me, it's actually a favorite of mine. It's one of those kind of what could have been albums. When I listen to it, I still think it sounds like The Doors. I imagine Jim Morrison singing it and think, where would this have elevated in the overall catalog, meaning their original 6 had Jim Morrison had sung on it. All in all, though, I do think it is a good album, and it is worth checking out if you don't know that. And since I said, or previously, let you guys know that it is available on CD, take a chance on it. If you've only ever listened to the 6 original studio albums, totally worth picking up on that. Now, this one here, I would think most people already know about, and it would have, but of course, if not, you're going to want to get this one too. Coming in at number 7, An American Prayer, 1978, ninth and final studio album from the band. The band actually reunited in 78 to work on this. It's a shame that nothing came of it and the band didn't stay together or go out and play live or anything of that sort. But it takes several of Jim Morrison's spoken word performances and adds music to it. It also includes some of the previously released spoken word performances from the albums, from past Doors albums. So it's his spoken word stuff. There is some singing on it as well. And there's also, music from the Doors. So even though it is really a Jim Morrison album featuring music of the Doors, everyone considers it to be a Doors album. So that's why I'm including it here at least. The album itself was broken into 5 parts and basically is a concept album. Part 1, Awake, it's about Jim's childhood. Part 2, To Come of Age, is about Morrison's high school years. Part 3, The Poet's Dream, is Morrison as a young poet. Part 4, World on Fire, is Morrison in his musical career with the Doors. And then Part 5, An American Prayer, is a summation of his whole life. And it's absolutely a fantastical tribute style album to Jim Morrison, and has become the ultimate sort of cap on their career. Just one of those things that was kind of perfect for the timing, perfect for what needed to be done, and perfectly executed, where it can be listened to as a tribute, but it can also be listened to as an authentic Doors album. Okay, coming in at number 6, we have Soft Parade from 1969, 4th studio album from the band. It's a real departure, though, from the previous 3 albums that the band had done before this one, where they added in brass and string arrangements. And this was all at the direction of Paul Rothchild, their producer, who suggested they should really move away and try something different. And again, there's moments of brilliance on this thing. I think in particular, one of the places that it worked really well was the song Touch Me, written by Robbie Krieger. That's a personal favorite of mine, one of my all-time favorite songs. In fact, I want to say, could be wrong, I think this was actually the first album I bought, full-length album that I bought from the Doors. Of course, I started with the best of, the classic 2 CD greatest hits, from the band. But this one here is a fantastic album, in my opinion. It's not as great as some of their earlier stuff, but in all, is still a very good album. On this one, though, Jim was dealing with a lot of personal stuff, so he wasn't as involved as much, which let Robbie Krieger really, spread his wings and shine a bit more. I myself am a fan of Robbie Krieger. I don't think Robbie Krieger gets enough credit that he really should have gotten being part of the Doors. And unfortunately, the stuff he did after the Doors didn't really show him in the best light or take off or do anything to make a new name for himself. So he's left with the legacy of the Doors, but this is one of those albums where he really gets to shine. And I think there's some fantastic tracks on here like Shaman's Blues, that's a Morrison written song, and Wishful Sinful, which is another Krieger song. So a lot of good stuff still on here, still totally worth checking out. All right, coming in at number 5, Waiting for the Sun from 1968, third studio album, the band's only number 1 album on the Billboard 200 album chart, at least here in the US, due in part, I think, to their number 1 single for the opening track, Hello, I Love You. So on this album here, they kind of returned to that pop format to give something of what, fans were looking for like another Light Your Fire kind of a thing. And they did that, but it was really in stark contrast to some of the other stuff on the album, like The Unknown Soldier, which is a song I've never really enjoyed on here, though that was the first single off of it. So I think it's one of those things that, they caught fans off guard with that, then returned with Hello, I Love You, and of course fans went wild for that. It was the first album where the band was writing more new material because they had kind of used up all that archival stuff that had been written that they were using for the first 2 albums. So it's the first time that the band really started to having to write in the studio. And even at the time, the band referred to this as their 3rd album slump due to that fact, because they had to come up with new material. But the album features 2 of my favorite tracks on here, 5 to 1 and Spanish Caravan. Those alone, I think, make this album totally worthwhile. So it's a split between pop songs and a bit more experimentation, but I think that's why, at least for me, that split on here, that sort of not holistic view on this one album, is at least why, for me, it's coming in at number 5. All right, coming in at number 4, Morrison Hotel from 1970, their 5th studio album. This was a return to their blues rock format after, the earlier album, that they were, trying different things out with Soft Parade and the brass arrangements and string arrangements and all that sort of stuff here. So this one here, had fans not liked that or whatever, I think this one made a big statement upon its return, kicking off with one of their signature songs, Roadhouse Blues. That in and of itself would have had all the fans running back to this, in my opinion. Fantastic album. What I like about this one, though, always, and I always think it's weird when this happens from a band, but the other song that's on here that's a really great one is Waiting for the Sun, title of their 3rd album, but it doesn't appear until their 5th. Didn't appear on their 4th album, it appeared on their 5th album. How strange is that? And I don't know enough of the history to say whether or not Waiting for the Sun was written for the album Waiting for the Sun and just put on the sidelines and not recorded until now, or it's one of those ones that the lyric was stuck in Jim's mind and was fleshed out and finally written for this one. I'm sure one of you guys out there know the history of that and can let everyone here know in the comments. But all in all, it's a great song, and it's very, it throws a lot of people off as to where that song comes from. A lot of people think it's on the Waiting for the Sun album. Of course, it is not. And there's other great songs that are on here too. Peace Frog, I really like. One of my favorite songs for the band, Ship of Fools, and then Queen of the Highway is an awesome one. And if you don't have the box set version of this, where you're sort of like a fly on the wall in the studio and they run through many different variations of the song Queen of the Highway, it's really cool to check that stuff out. But bottom line is, this album is really good start to finish, and even though it's was a bit of a departure, but it also was a bit of a return for the band, this one here I think is stellar and totally worth coming in at number 4. Okay, down at the top 3 here, what comes in at number 3? This one is a personal favorite of mine and could have easily come in anywhere in the top spot here. Strange Days from 1967, second studio album, picking up where the debut left off. This one here having the same power, the same energy as the debut album, but there's a little bit more experimentation on here. And I myself like that. I think that was to the advantage of the album. It's a little more eerie and I don't want to say creepy, but ethereal might be a better word for it. And I think that was something that the Doors were really good at creating. So that sort of stuff appears in here. Best known for like the title track, Strange Days, Love Me Two Times, which I actually first knew as an Aerosmith cover of their song, doing it for a soundtrack movie. I also love People Are Strange and When the Music's Over. The album to me sounds as fresh as when I first heard it, probably would be still as fresh as when it came out, but I know that from the first time I heard it, I still return to this album all the time. And this one easily could have popped into 2 or number 1. I really had debate on this top 3, but this one is coming in that 3rd spot. So what came in at number 2? This one here, I have to say, for the longest time was my number 1 album, and I had to rethink things here. But what is number 2? LA Woman, 1971. I know for a lot of people, this is considered their penultimate album and ranks in the number 1 spot. And on any given day, I could probably swap this one for what will become my number 1. 6th studio album, final with Jim Morrison, before he quit the band in 1971. I think this one here is their most developed album. It shows the most growth for the band, and where the band probably would have been going had Morrison stayed with the group. And it's a real shame because I love bands out of the 60s. The Stones are one, The Who are one, but I think those bands did better output in the 70s than they did in their original 60s era. And we're only just starting to feel what the Doors were gonna do in the 70s, and unfortunately never really got to experience it since Jim Morrison left, which is what makes this album as great as it is, opening with the killer song Changeling on here. But it has my all-time favorite song, and it's probably the reason why it was my number 1 for so long, the song Love Her Madly. I absolutely love that song, yes, pun intended. But there's other killer standout songs. The title track, LA Woman, which I first heard from Billy Idol covering it. So remember, I'm a child of the 80s, and I grew up post this, but this is one of those bands that when I saw the movie, Oliver Stone's The Doors, and then I heard Aerosmith doing covers, I heard Billy Idol, and so I said, well, wait, I know some of those, I like this movie, let me actually go check out the band. And of course, it turns out no one can do their music the way that they can. I actually love their versions better than those covers, but it's what introduced me. And also the song The Wasp, Texas Radio and the Big Beat, a killer track on here, but it's got the all-time classic Riders on the Storm. You can't deny how great this album is here. And as I said, on any given day, if I were to film this episode tomorrow or yesterday, it could have been the number 1 spot. But I would say for the last couple years, this album moved into my number 1 spot, whereas it never ranked this high. But I heard the 50th anniversary remastering of this thing a few years back, and it really changed my opinion about how I feel on it. And if you haven't already figured it out, coming in at number 1, the self-titled Doors 1967 debut studio album, arguably one of the greatest all-time debut albums in history. Not necessarily highest ranking in terms of sales, but I think in overall quality, the statement that it made, the impact that it made, all of that sort of stuff makes it one of the greatest all-time debut albums. It has some of their biggest material that's on here. And what also I think makes this album great, at least for me, and it's what I eventually heard within it, which changed my opinion, is that the band had worked out the material of this live in clubs beforehand in 1966. And I believe that that energy is actually what's captured on here. Far better than other bands in the studio that were trying to capture that live feeling, that didn't capture it until they made the live album that they would make sometime later, maybe becoming more famous for that live album. The Doors actually caught their live sound and vibe on this album, especially with opening track Break On Through. The intensity of Jim Morrison's vocals on this, his singing, his output, that explosive high energy feel, I think registers not only on that song, but all the way through on this. It's the reason this thing here is ranking number one for me, but still, there's so many other great tracks on this. Some of the biggest hits out of their catalog, like Soul Kitchen, The Crystal Ship, another personal favorite of mine, Alabama Song. Then you have Light My Fire, which I think would be the reason most people would consider putting this album at number one. And I gotta say, Light My Fire is one of those ones that's maybe worn out, I guess is the word for it. I love the song still, but I don't ever need to hear it again. I've heard it so many times. It too was a number one hit on the Billboard Hot 100. Backdoor Man, their cover of the Willie Dixon song, is outstanding. And then you have The End, one of the greatest long form songs ever written, done by the Doors on here. So not a bad song on this album, not one misstep. There's no songs on here I skip. I don't even skip Light My Fire on this thing. So all in all, in the end of the day, that intensity, that captured live feeling, the number of classic songs, and the fantastic start to finish form of this album, that is why it comes in at number one for me. So there you go. That's an album ranking of all 9 studio albums from the Doors. Which is your favorite? Let me know in the comments. And I would be curious to know if anyone else out there likes the 2 post Jim Morrison albums, Other Voices in Full Circle or not. I love Other Voices. I still pull that out regularly and listen to that. So there you go. Again, my album ranking. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.